Warpugs, how's it going? We're here. One second, I gotta fix this because it's not showing up. Chat is not showing up, and I do not know why. It's kind of driving me crazy. So let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. And let's try to get this fixed. Uh-oh. Okay. Now, maybe it'll work. Come on. Huh. Why is nothing working here? It doesn't make much sense. There we go. Okay, now we're back to good. Finally got that fixed. Warpugs, how's it going? It's Monday. Hope everybody had a good Monday. You're using stealth. I can't see you, Ronnie. Au contraire. Yes. All right, so we are here for the pig. We're here for the pig who is now promoting gamer subs. Now, it says, from LazerPig, your mostly accurate second or third favorite historian. I can rock with that. I can rock with that. Now, so, it's Monday. Some of us have gotten off work. I know I did. Came over and sat down and just, yeah. It's about that time. So, my brain has completely failed me, guys. Yeah, it's like, it is a definite Monday. I have the whole fog thing going on right now. So, I'm going to be putting out something tomorrow. I have been trying to teach Valk the ways of actual decent movies, because she apparently hasn't seen anything since the Stone Age. Cat, stop pawing away at my keyboard. Thank you. There you go. My cat decides to sleep on my keyboard, and I don't know why. But tomorrow I'm going to be putting out the first episode of Band of Brothers, with me and Valk checking that out. Valk has never seen it before. I, of course, have, because, yeah. On top of that, if you're on Patreon, I have the full reaction up on Patreon. Of course, I had to really dial down things for YouTube. It is what it is. But I'm going to be putting that out. And the full episode is going to be on Patreon. It's actually already up there. I'm going to be uploading the second episode today, and maybe the third episode by Wednesday, if I can edit it down. Now, so we're trying to help Valk learn what good cinema is. But we're in for our own cinematic treat tonight, because we got LazerPig, and this is Stealth, a controversy. So, Warpugs, X in chat if you're ready to go. Have I seen the Pacific? Of course I've seen the Pacific. You know, Tim from Jurassic Park had a really rough life after the park. I'm telling you that right now. So, X in chat if you're ready to go. Check the description down below for my links, for LazerPig's links. Check the merch store, all the other kind of stuff. I've said everything I need to say. I am doing fantastic. Brandon, how are you doing? Have you seen Metro 2033 series? I have not. I have not. Let's get into it. It's time.
Why, hello.
Hello.
I'm sophisticated.
Oh.
After a hard day's work, horse riding around my fabulous estate and
Yes.
shooting peasants with my enormous gun,
Yes.
I feel like I need a delightfully refreshing beverage to pack me up for an evening at the Phillies and Beef Club. And we all know what happens there. But as a sophisticated man, I won't just trick anything. Oh no. So when I crack open my delightful waifu gamer subs chalice and admire that ample bosom and take that fast, delightful sip of anime girl thigh. I feel
Yes, anime girl thigh.
myself reach the highest peaks of sophistication. Truly, this is the time to be alive.
Yes.
Now, if you adorably sophisticated peasantry watching this musing wish to reach levels of sophistication equal to my own, one only need visit gamersubs.gg, where using the code LazerPig, one can get 10% off every order, not just your first one.
Yeah.
The hell kind of voice am I doing?
24 hours of
Yes.
Princess Video Girls Live. You can enjoy free samples and free shipping with the first 250 peasantry receiving a sticker pack. Get fucking hype, boys. Sticker pack for free. You love stickers. We all love stickers.
Yes!
It's the best thing ever. Stickers. Gamer subs. Code Laser. Stickers. Free stickers. What are we? Fucking 12 again?
Yes!
Stickers. Boob cup. You're denying it, but you want the boob cup.
You want the boob cup. You want the boob cup. Abs.
Code Laser. Gamersubs.gg. Zero sugar. Carb free. Best and probably healthiest way to wean yourself off an energy drink addiction. Stickers. Get free 10% off purchases. Code Laser. The ad is now over.
Yay!
Subs gave me a year-long contract. The objective is to get them to cancel it. You have been warned. I'm LazerPig by the funny wake-up powder.
Yes!
Here's the video. Hello, I'm LazerPig,
Hey!
proclaimed military expert and all-round bit of an idiot. I've always been obsessed with history, even from an early age where history books and DVDs were a common gift on Christmas and birthdays, which honestly I much preferred over gift boxes of deodorant and eau de toilette.
From Links, we got Axe over here. If no one... Yes, LazerPig speedrunning contact termination. You don't like him. X in chat to nuke me. Who cares? Go ahead. Do it.
Whatever the fuck that is. You may have shared a similar experience.
Yes.
Some people still buy DVDs. I don't know. I'm not down with the kids. I have no idea what they do.
Here's the bad thing, okay? Here's the bad thing. They always cancel the stuff I really like to buy, as far as like Old Spice. Like it. They had this one scent I really, really liked. Yes, Axe smells like... No, you have no idea. When Axe first came out, people were sitting there thinking it was legitimately a bath, okay? And it was so annoying. It was so annoying. Because you would see these guys, and it'd always be the same dude with slick back hair and a muscle shirt, and they didn't have any damn muscles, and they're spraying themselves down with about 20 pounds of an aerosol can, wondering why they're sneezing all the time.
Whatever they do scares me. But since my discovery of the Reformers and the fighter plane Mafia back in 2013, my subject of interest moved away from the Second World War and big armor boxes with guns in them, fascinating though they are. And instead, I spent many a night, pot of coffee in one hand, bottle of wine in the other. Alright, more wine than coffee.
True.
Alright, fine, I had a bottle of wine in both hands. Okay. I ventured deeper and deeper into this weird-ass rabbit hole of a fairly recent history that so many people just don't seem to know about.
Let's hear it.
Happening literally just a few years ago. These men, this self-proclaimed fighter plane mafia, lied to the public for years, all to further their careers and financial gain, doing what so many children on the internet do by proclaiming they had some hand in developing some of America's most famed weapons. And they got completely away with it. Up until his death, Pierce Spray was still considered the lead designer of the A-10, the F-15, and even the F-16, in spite of being involved in none of these projects.
Lovely.
John Boyd claimed he designed the F-15, and yet had almost nothing to do with it. I mean, yes, he was involved in a very early design spec phase, but his ideas were scrapped after the advent of the MiG-31, and the plane that would become the F-15 was completely redesigned from the ground up. Colonel James Burton would always proclaim that the Bradley was a work of Pentagon and corruption, in spite of himself being arguably the most corrupt, career-motivated, and money-wasting element of the entire program.
Yay.
And Spiny got an award for his services to the government from the Pogo Foundation, the foundation he helped found.
Oh.
All he did while still working at the Pentagon was to send over 500 emails to various people over the years, blasting them for their critique of the fighter plane mafia, several of which were sent to the editor of the Air Force magazine, in which he referred to him as intellectual slime for daring to point out that in Spiny's report, where he claimed the defense budget of the United States was 5 times what it had been in Vietnam, shock horror, he had forgotten about inflation.
Yes.
And the one question I have constantly asked.
Wow, that seems to be happening a lot. Old people lied so young people can't see that they're tired and confused. Stop the presses. Yeah.
Asked myself,
Thank you, Tower.
is why? Why have these men been allowed to get away with this shit for as long as they have? I mean, yes, the Air Force is still to
Because everybody keeps on letting him get away with it. What else is new?
a point obsessed with Boyd, even if it is just his fellow PowerPoint commandos. But surely there were higher-ups around at the time who would have known what he was saying was bullshit, knew he and Spray had absolutely nothing to do with the projects they claimed ownership of. Heck, when Pentagon Wars was published, and even when it was being converted into a film, the generals Burton was talking about were all still alive, and would have known damn fine he was nothing but a career monkey out for blood. So why say nothing? Why let the fighter plane mafia continue their bullshit rampage to the point where any private snafu, disillusioned from the propaganda trip that roped him into serving, genuinely believes the US military and the Pentagon are more corrupt and more self-serving than the fucking Kremlin?
Okay, hold on a second. Come here, you. This cat has been harassing me for the past 20 minutes. Ow! Okay, do you wanna get down now? Okay, you wanna get down now. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop paying attention to you. Now you have to stay off that table. Okay?
Now I have a theory.
Gato.
Of course, it's just a theory. It sounds plausible, but ultimately I have no idea if it's true or not. And considering it's about the US military, it could be just as equally true as it is untrue, or anywhere in between.
Let's hear it.
Let me explain.
Let's go.
After years of digging through archives, books, declassified reports, emails, and even opinion pieces by those around at the time, in search for information about the fighter plane mafia and the true depths of this almost calm they've been running since the 50s, the name of a certain aircraft keeps popping up. Now, this aircraft, the reformers absolutely hate it. For years, they waged an intense war against it remaining in active service, and when it was finally retired, they celebrated it as a victory. You should, of course, know what it is, being as it's one of my favorite planes. Now, I know I say that a lot. I mean, I say that about almost every single plane I ever see. The Vulcan, for example, the Harrier, the MiG-29, the Jet. But one has always stood out. I had a picture of one as a kid. I had models of the damn thing. I even had this big one you could stick little action figures in, and his bike came out the side. I don't know why it did that, but it did. I had a weird childhood where I played with dolls, but in my defense, they were action dolls with guns and stabby things and
Yeah, Kung Fu grip!
makeup you could put on, but it was
Hold on a second. One second, guys. Nobody type in chat real quick. I gotta get rid of something here. Actually, get rid of someone. Let's see. Done. Done and done. Okay, I think that works. I think that works. Okay, cool beans. All right, there we go. All right, cool beans. Handled. There we go. All right. Commence!
Was action makeup for camouflage, you know, for jungles and swamps and the after party at the ambassador.
Yeah, we don't talk. Don't worry about it, Ronnie. We don't talk about people like that. They just want a little bit of attention, and we're not going to give it to them. So, carry on.
Reception where you needed to look your best, otherwise you'd cause a diplomatic scandal, and no one wants that.
Action Man! Oh, not you, Blue Lick.
That plane, of course, was the F-117, the Nighthawk. My absolute favorite.
Yeah, don't even give those people any worries. We'll have to take care of that.
No, because it was in the title of the video. Were you thinking it was something else? Can you not read?
No, I can't read. I'm sorry, I'm not perfect.
Only being revealed to the public
I
in
did too,
1988,
Captain
the
Commander.
Nighthawk became a symbol of the 80s and is quite possibly the most iconic aircraft of all time. There is nothing in the world that looks quite like it.
You know,
it is instantly identifiable to even the most brain-dead of individuals. Even the ones who lurk on internet forums using the name and profile picture of some 1940s German general, arguing that the Challenger 2 cannot possibly be a good tank because the armor isn't
Okay, seriously, this plane, the first time I ever saw it, that was a sexy-ass plane, I'm just saying.
sloped. It could potentially fire up the tattered remains of that one remaining brain cell, and with just a little bit of effort and quite a lot of energy drink, might just be able to identify this as an F-117 before launching into a random at the Horton Hill, which I've already covered. Granted, in a video that makes me sound like I'm recording it at the bottom of a well, because I recorded all of my old videos in a microphone that I stole from a karaoke bar. I was very poor back then. But I'm not covering it again, okay? But what is the F-117? Why is it important? Why do the reformers hate it so much? And what has it got to do with Pierre Spray and my theory? Well,
Did they want to put a tank cannon on it, is my only question. Mr. Galaxy, thanks, bud. Old man, I finished the end of the Death Part 3, and all I have to say is, yeah, I'm waiting. Thankfully, nobody has said anything to me so far. I appreciate you guys keeping End of the Death spoiler free. I really, really do, because it's been taking me a while to actually get there. But Erebus is doing Erebus things right now in the story, and I'm just waiting. All right, continuing on.
well, the F-117 is a stealth fighter. I mean, we call it a fighter, but it doesn't do the actual fighting that you'd typically expect of a fighter plane. It doesn't, like, fight other fighters. I mean, not really. I mean, some former F-117 pilots have spoken about the plane having sidewinders on improvised rails and flying around at night trying to see if they can shoot something down, but, well, no records if they did that or not have ever been released to the public, so if or not that's true, well, your guess is as good as mine. So, it doesn't fight other planes. It was never designed to do it. So what does it fight? Well, this plane fights the ground.
Thank you, Galaxy Wide.
Or rather, what's on the ground.
Blue jet, that's the
You
Elon
see,
Musk
for
jet.
thousands of years, militaries have typically kept important things that they need on the ground.
True.
Things like barracks and ammo depots. And
Thank
there's a
you,
good
Blue Light.
reason for this. It's cheap, it's there, and it avoids either having to build a large network of tunnels or mess around with the logistics of balloons. The ground is also where people live,
Yay.
where their stuff is. And if you're the military of a country, your country's people and your country's stuff is typically what you're trying to stop other countries from stealing. So it's pretty good to have your military nearby in case that happens. Now, at some point, someone realizes planes are a thing. When you're in a plane, you could fight things that were on the ground, but because you weren't on the ground, and typically everything on the ground is designed to fight things that are also on the ground, it has a kind of hard time getting to you, who isn't on the ground. Now, this gives you a huge advantage. So a plane has the amazing ability to fly over the ground and not have to deal with anything that was, say, in the way of like a regular army, like walls or trenches or minefields. And in fact, it could fly all the way past all that bullshit and fight things on the ground that typically weren't expecting to have to fight that day. Things like a factory. Because a factory is a building that's on the ground. So it can't fight you, who is not on the ground. That gives you a huge advantage. Now, we have a word for things like that, which is bomber.
Yes.
So why is this a fighter and not a bomber? Why isn't it the B-117? Well, I looked into it, and the official explanation seems to be No, seriously, there are theories. One theory, which seems to be the most plausible, is they recruited fighter pilots to fly these things, because it's a single-seater and it flies like a fighter, which bomber pilots wouldn't be used to. And a fighter pilot might get upset if they had to degrade themselves to flying a bomber. Fighter pilots fly fighters. They don't fly bombers. Bombers are big and slow and don't do all the super cool maneuvers you see in Top Gun. Bombers aren't exciting. Now, fighters are exciting. Fighters can fight things that fight back, so it's far more noble and adventurous, unlike bombers who fight things that don't fight back, like buildings and civilians.
This is the best explanation I have ever heard for fighters and bombers. I'm here for it. The pilot knows where he is because he knows where he isn't. That is very accurate. If he's not on the ground, he's flying. If he is on the ground, he's not flying. If he's in the water, he's in the wrong field.
And war crimes and stuff. Like, there's a hierarchy in military aviation. It goes fighters, bombers, and then transport. I mean, okay, there's a bit of an overlap. Like the pilots of MH6 Littlebirds, for example. Helicopter pilots are somewhat not super respected by the Air Force. Notably because, due to interdepartmental politics, they are mostly run by the Army. Because the Army needed aircraft. And the Air Force decided that everything that was a plane was their jurisdiction.
Okay.
So if the Army needed close air support, they had to call the Air Force, who could turn around and say, no. And the Army thought that was a stupid idea, so they built a flying machine that wasn't a plane, and this turned out to be a really good idea. But if I'm going to be 100% honest with you, having seen a Little Bird in action, these guys have half an inch of glass protecting their entire body from death. They have a minigun and like a rocket pod or something, and they just find the target and they fly in close to it. I mean, so close. If you're a guy in a trench and then a little bird's coming at you, they get so close you could reach in and punch the pilot. That's how close they get. And they come back.
Story time from the old man. So we had helicopters on board our ship, and each air crew is named. Has a name. Ours was the Proud Warriors, but the nickname of the tribe was the Fakawi tribe. And the reason it was called the Fakawi tribe is because one of the officers, one of the pilots, had this really heavy accent, this really heavy Bostonian accent, right? And so every time they would go out on mission for like more than a couple hours, the co-pilot and the pilot would take turns just taking a nap. Well, every time this guy woke up, he'd wake up real quick with a start and go, "Where the fuck are we?" Fakawi tribe. Tell your grandchildren about that.
Back with no ammo and the biggest smile on their face, and just this
Fakawi. Where the fuck are we?
trail of devastation and death behind them. An inch of glass, protecting their balls from a bullet. I would not want to fuck with any of these guys.
No, I
Anyway,
wouldn't either.
I'm rambling. So the F-117 is not a fighter, it's a bomber. It's labeled as a fighter, but it doesn't do what fighters do. It do what bombers do. What does the stealth part mean? Well,
It do what bomber do.
stealth, in lieu of any nonsensical, overly detailed explanation as given by various fancy dictionaries and websites, is the art of not being seen. If you can't be seen, the enemy can't shoot at you. This is why the F-117 is black and flies at night. Night is dark. You can't see very well in the dark, especially if what you're looking for is also dark. Only the superior American mind could think of such things. Okay, it's more than that. It's not stealthy because they painted it black. Okay, look, this is going to take some time to explain. Because to understand why stealth, you need to understand why is stealth important.
Let's go.
Since the 1950s, the development of aircraft focused largely around the deployment of nuclear bombs, dropped from very long-range bombers, which were expected to operate well outside the range of surface weapons, which at the point were largely big guns that could put objects from the ground into the air, where planes are, and planes don't typically like that. But those guns had maximum ranges of maybe 25,000 feet. A modern bomber could fly at 40,000 feet and above,
Yes.
meaning these guns were pretty much useless. If you wanted to hit something that high up with a gun, you'd need a really, really big gun, like an impractically sized gun, and then bombers could just fly higher. So what was the point? Everything was built around the logic that bombers were king. The bomber would always get through no matter what. This led to such wonderful trains of thought, mostly from certain members of the US Air Force, that other divisions of the US military, mostly the Army, were completely unnecessary, as the Air Force could bomb any threat into total submission. Therefore, the US Army doesn't need that huge budget. Wouldn't it be great if the Air Force had it instead? Think of what we could build. This ideology came to a crashing halt when, in 1960, the Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane that had been flying at an altitude of 70,000 feet, presumed to be well above the altitude that Soviet fighters could fly at. And technically, it was. The U-2 was not shot down by a fighter. It had been shot down by a surface-to-air system, a missile. And like many things in the US military, this caused an argument.
Yes.
In fairness, the writing had been on the wall for quite some time that something like this would happen. Joint war games with the Brits had found the English Electric Lightning could not only easily intercept U-2 spy planes, but even exceed them in flight ceiling when pushed.
It's always funny when you say the U.S. Navy is the largest navy in the world and the largest Air Force.
Blatantly obvious that the days of nuclear bombers were numbered, but a close-knit group within the ranks of the Air Force, dubbed the Bomber Mafia, ignored the signs.
Oh, yeah.
After the U-2 incident, the Air Force would separate into two separate camps. One side believed that fighter bombers would be the future of the Air Force, and those who believed in the separation of bombers and fighters, and that fighters should remain a dedicated air superiority role. Over the years, those two camps would slowly start to dominate thinking within the Pentagon, and oddly enough, both were equally justified. The U-2 incident had caused major concerns within the minds of the first group. They believed air superiority could never be achieved unless ground-based anti-air systems could also be taken out, without the need of large bombers. But the second group believed that the inclusion of equipment required to facilitate a ground attack role would compromise the fighter's ability to, well, fight. Heavy equipment on a plane could compromise speed and maneuverability, and in the dogfight, if you couldn't maneuver, if you couldn't get your speed up, you were dead. And in fairness, they had a point. This was the 1960s. Ground attack meant heavy rocket pods and bombs and cannons. Not really something you want on a fighter plane. Now, the two sides would eventually agree to compromise, and the resulting aircraft would be the F-15. A topic for another video because, you know, we'll get to that.
This is one of the sexiest fighters ever made, okay? And undefeated in the air.
Get to that. But while all this was going on, there was a problem about what to do with all these bombers. In the USSR, development had begun to shift away from bombers and more towards long-range ballistic missiles, and the US was looking to do the same. And this kinda had a knock-on effect. Most notably, a large supercarrier called the United States class, designed to carry and launch nuclear-armed bombers, was cancelled. This led
Look at the size of this thing. We consider the Gerald Ford huge. The United States class was going to be ungodly.
To revolt within the Naval Admiralty and cemented the feud between the Navy and the Air Force, because though the Navy's bomber fleet was axed, the Air Force's was not. The Bomber Mafia were still too strong an influence within the walls of the Pentagon, and they were not going to accept the decommissioning of the nuclear bomber fleet, even though now it was theoretically useless. But even then, their influence was dwindling. The ideology of the bomber will always get through was now being seriously questioned, and with the Bomber Mafia ruling the roost for so long, sub-factions within the Air Force, sensing weakness, were starting to circle like sharks. In order to stay on top, the Bomber Mafia needed to keep the idea of long-range bombers relevant, and the suggestion on how to tackle this problem came from a very unexpected place.
Okay.
Looking for a cheaper solution than expensive long-range missile systems, Britain had tested the idea of flying bombers at low altitudes. Now, only one of their bombers could actually do this, the Vulcan. The other two bombers in the V fleet were built for high-altitude maneuvers, and operating for too long at low altitude caused serious fatigue on the hull. But the Vulcan was different. It was able to keep low, and its design meant it was somewhat difficult to keep track of on older radar systems. The Brits began training Vulcan crews on how to navigate at low altitude. It was re-equipped with stronger wings, terrain-following radar, and larger air intakes, and though it had never been designed for such a role, and many higher-ups in the British military doubted it would have ever worked, during trials and exercises, the low-altitude Vulcan proved fairly successful. The bomber mafia took note of this. They could develop a new bomber that was capable of low-altitude attacks, and the project would be saved. Now this is where things start to get weird.
Yay!
The Navy's rebellion had been...
Thank you, Blue Licked. The Vulcan. I would like to bomb that creature. Just a little boom on his snoot.
largely successful. While they didn't end up with the United States bomber carrier design, they did end up with the Forrestal, probably the most iconic of America's carriers, with the last one finally being decommissioned in 1998.
Oh, the Forrestal. The Forrestal, the prime reason why the military cracked down so hard on drugs. If you could have a reason why the military cracked down so hard on drugs, you will not find a better example than the Forrestal. You won't find one.
But the Navy wanted their own nuclear bomber. This was entirely a political move to remain competitive when it came to funding, so not wanting another rebellion on their hands, Congress agreed, and the Navy ended up with the A3D Sky Warrior. Well, originally they had the AG Savage, which wins points for style, but was so heavy and cumbersome that it couldn't fit onto most carriers. Everyone hated it, and it was found that if it did drop an A-bomb, the plane wasn't fast enough to outrun the blast. So it was basically a suicide mission, which, incidentally, most people are not particularly fond of.
No.
So the Sky Warrior became the way forward.
Yay!
Now, the Air Force saw this, got jealous, and wanted their own, so they asked for a ground-based variant of the Sky Warrior. And in theory, this would have been an easy conversion. Add in ejector seats, take off the hooks, and remove the reinforced struts needed for carrier landings. But because the Air Force was the Air Force and the Navy wouldn't share, this conversion took far longer and was far more expensive than it should have been. And though visually similar, the resulting B-66 destroyer was completely different in almost every respect. But then...
Okay, so the Forrestal... So whenever a United States ship is commissioned, the first ship of that class is going to be named for the actual class itself. Like early Burke class destroyers, the first one that was ever put together of that was the early Burke Ticonderoga class cruisers, Ticonderoga. So what you wind up having is like the first Kennedy class carrier, first Gerald R. Ford class, Gerald R. Ford, first Los Angeles class, Los Angeles, first Seawolf class, Seawolf, you get it. So the Forrestal was patrolling, and safety standards were not being kept. A lot of other things was not being taken care of, and people were imbibing there was a lot of smoking of some hash going off. And so what wound up happening was a fire broke out on the Forrestal, and it nearly burned the whole damn ship to the ground. It nearly burned the ship down to the waterline. That's what happened with it. And so after that, the military cracked down hard on drugs, because when they investigated, there was a lot of that going on. Things just weren't being maintained properly. That's what happened.
And as is quite typical of the time period, the Soviets did a thing.
Yay!
The question was the Tu-16, a long-range twin-engine jet bomber. Now, the Navy started to become a little bit concerned by the Tu-16. It believed that these bombers were fast, in fact so fast, by the time the radar of a ship had detected them, their interceptors wouldn't have enough time to, well, intercept them. And it was very possible that if the Soviets launched these nuclear-armed bombers against a carrier fleet, then there was little the fleet could actually do to stop them. They needed a solution. The result for the Navy was the F-16 Missileer. Now, again, this was not a fighter. It was not designed to dogfight or attack other fighters. It was built to fight bombers. Thus, it was built to fly high, be slow, but importantly, stick around for a long time in the same area and wait for the bombers to come to them, and then shoot them down with a very novel idea: a long-range radar-guided missile.
Yay!
This pisses a lot of people off, mostly the Air Force, since intercepting bombers is supposed to be their job, and they don't have a shiny new missile plane to do it, so they want their own one. But the Missileer doesn't have a gun, so when it runs out of missiles, it has no choice but to go home, to a carrier that's about to be nuked. This defies convention, since missiles are...
It's also a very bad idea to fly towards the mushroom cloud. I'm just giving you a general opinion, okay? A general opinion.
new, many see them as a bit of an expensive fad, an unreliable wonder weapon. And again, this is the 1960s, they were kinda right. In order to get a lock-on with its missiles, the Missileer had to get within visual range of the target, and then drop out of visual range before firing to give the missile enough time to activate. Now this wasn't technically a fault of the system. The Missileer could lock on and fire at things it couldn't see. It was a fault of doctrine. Beyond visual range combat wasn't really a thing. And since radars of the time couldn't really identify exactly what it was looking at, there was a slight chance the fast large flying jet bomber you were looking at was actually one of those new jet airliners that were becoming all the rage. So the pilot had to visually identify the target before firing. But a lot of people, most notably the reformers who like to smugly state this fact at any presented opportunity, tend to forget about that bit. Now, as per usual, this caused something of an argument, and into that argument steps one Robert McNamara.
Okay.
McNamara is a character that deserves a video all in his own, but there are better people working on that, so I'll skip the majority of the politics that surround him. McNamara was a bit of a maverick, in that he did what he wanted, and he liked to piss off the top brass as much as physically possible. Because of this, most of the good he did never received due credit, and instead he went down in history as the stupid person you giggle at in your podcast when you're talking about Vietnam. Needless to say, talking to almost any Air Force veteran about him will encourage wrath. But regardless of what you think of him, McNamara stepped into position to find three branches of the same military all fighting each other. They all had their own designations for things, their own way of doing things. No one wanted to share, there was almost no standardization, and everyone thought they could easily win any war if the other two branches would kindly stop hogging all the funding and let them build a Death Star. McNamara looked at the Missileer and found the concept to be needlessly outdated and expensive. I mean, it was basically replacing an early warning radar system with a plane that needed fuel and had a pilot who would be sat circling for hours until the next plane came along to replace him. It was a huge cost of manpower and resources.
Right.
But on top of that, the Air Force's own bomber fleet was not exactly up to modern standards. The B-47 Stratojet, though one of the most drop-dead gorgeous aircraft in the world.
Okay, seriously, this plane is damn sexy. I don't care if you like flying bombers or you like fighters. You can't tell me that that isn't a sexy beast of a plane. Okay? Okay, like, argue it. You can't. It's
Fight me on that.
damn.
It had the tendency to blow up in midair, all by itself. And for reasons completely unknown to the Air Force at the time, McNamara decided that this was problematic. What he wanted was a cheaper solution in the form of a joint aircraft, a single plane that could fulfill the needs of both the Air Force and the Navy, one that was interchangeable and would only require slight modification. Now that in itself was never going to be easy.
Exen checked in nuclear.
Most people today just aren't aware of how bad the interforce rivalry was between the three main branches. Individual generals held a lot of influence and power, and their ability to move funds around for personal projects would make today's Russian oligarchs weep for joy. They would even initiate projects just to spite other branches, an example being the A-10, which started life as a spite project because the Air Force didn't want to use a Navy design, and the F-14 because the Navy didn't want to use an Air Force design, and the Comanche stealth attack helicopter because the Army wanted to do everything by itself.
This is actually true. You think we should bring back Zeppelin warfare and do away with these flimsy, unreliable gliding things? Yes, Baron, I believe you are quite accurate, sir. I actually think we need to encourage dueling from the deck of the Zeppelins as well. Yes. Don't be a pussy and fill it full of hydrogen. We want helium in there. Because if you're going to go down with a ship, you must go down in a blaze of glory.
Getting all these people together in a room to agree on a single aircraft was somewhat akin to having Margaret Thatcher and Gerry Adams shake hands. The required jet, according to the Air Force and Navy, would need to be capable of going supersonic, be equipped with advanced missile systems, be capable of dropping nukes, operate from carriers, perform surveillance missions, interceptions, regular patrols, strategic bombing, and electronic warfare, as well as be able to maneuver at both high and low altitudes. Now this was problematic. To cut the long and very boring science lesson short, the air is thick. The faster you go, the more it pushes back, and thus the more powerful an engine you need to maintain speed, and thus the more fuel you'll consume. So you need big wings that create a lot of downforce, because the more downforce you have, the more lift you have, and the faster, I'm simplifying, but bear with me, you will theoretically turn. Get that mixture wrong, and you end up with the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, the worst plane ever made. Do not worry, I will get to that. We'll all get to that. The problem with building a plane like this is sometimes planes need to go high, and the higher up you are, the thinner the air gets. Up there, having big air-breathing engines is not a good idea. There's just not enough air to feed them. They tend to get very hot and do things like melt or catch fire. And though you can fly faster with much less fuel, those big wings you have are going to cause so much drag that if you attempt to maneuver them the same way at that speed, they're going to snap off. What you want is swept back wings, but that offers low maneuverability at low altitudes and can make the aircraft very unstable at low speeds. This is the big problem that fighter aircraft designers are always faced with.
He's eventually going to get back to he's eventually going to get back. You'll see what he's coming back to. All this is explaining one plane.
What altitude do you design your planes to operate in, high or low? If you get it wrong, you end up with the Falkland scenario, where the British Air Force and Harriers, designed for low-altitude operations, absolutely kicked the ass out of the Argentinian Air Force, who had things like the Mirage 3, high-altitude fighters, who got outmaneuvered when they tried to engage the British at low altitude. Now, there are ways around this. Typically, high-altitude aircraft have an advantage over low-altitude simply because of height and the ability to dive bomb an opponent. But when you have a bomber attempting to fly around radar sites and mountains, having an ability to remain maneuverable at low altitude is not an advantage you can afford to lose. So what the fuck do you do here? Well, many ideas are proposed. The Air Force considered a plane that could be held within a larger plane and then detach its supersonic shell to go subsonic when needed. This would be a waste of material and would leave parts of an expensive plane all across a foreign power's territory. So the Navy came up with an idea of having a plane that could transform instead, folding its wings back into itself to create a sort of wedge shape that would allow it to remain maneuverable and fast at high altitude. And as is very typical, that's when the arguments began. The Navy wanted their own plane that could carry huge fuel loads without the need for external pods. They also didn't want ejector seats because those were an Air Force thing. Instead, they wanted an escape pod, which they actually got. The Air Force wanted the aircraft to be thinner and have tandem seating with two separate radar displays. The Navy wanted side-by-side seating so the pilots could share a radar screen. The Navy wanted it to go Mach 2, the Air Force Mach 2.3. The Air Force demanded it handle 7G, and the Navy wanted this preposterously huge radar put into it. On and on this went. Numerous companies attempting to entertain both sets of designs, and almost all were rejected, outside of Boeing. Boeing had created a design that, in some bizarre miracle, both branches liked. It did everything they both wanted it to do, but then McNamara came in, and he didn't like it. The problem with Boeing's concept was that it shared very little components between the Air Force and the Navy's design. It was effectively two separate aircraft, which would limit the ability for both branches to standardize. This was not what he wanted, so he told them to try again, and again, and again. And in spite of finally having committee approval, in spite of having both branches ready to shake hands on Boeing's design, McNamara instead chose the design of General Dynamics. This turned out to be a good thing, because in 1964, General Dynamics would achieve perfection.
Ooh, boy. Oh. Yes. 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 Oh, God, that looks so sexy.
The resulting F-111 was one of
Fleet
the
of
most
stealth tanks,
successful
yeah.
bombers of its day, and the reformers absolutely hated it. Yes,
Of
this
course.
was an F-111 video the entire time. I pulled a sneaky on you.
Oh.
The reformers believed that aircraft didn't need radar or fancy electronics, that precision bombing was just a fantasy, and that missiles were unreliable wonder weapons that could never beat the gun and the clever pilot. But the F-111 proved otherwise. Its ability to strike at targets with laser precision earned it the nickname the Air Assassin. In fact, it was so good at precision bombing, it would beat the reformers' champion, the A-10 Warthog, at the one thing it was designed to do: tank busting. In fact, during Operation Desert Storm, it would fly more sorties and rack far more kills than any other plane. In fact, the F-111s were switched to a tank hunting role in order to compensate for the poor performance of the A-10s. The F-111s could operate at night, which was not something the A-10s could do. They could fly in bad weather, which was not something the A-10s could do. And they had the uncanny ability to recognize the difference between an Iraqi truck and a British scimitar tank.
Something the A-10 couldn't do. I don't know what the song is, but I want it.
Again, not something the A-10 could do. This
If you guys want to learn... Okay, so... X in chat about if you know a good deal about Operation Desert Storm. Because Operation Desert Storm was an absolute masterclass of how to do an actual air and ground campaign and how to carry out an invasion. It's an absolute masterclass. 100 hours, the fourth largest military on the planet was on its knees.
infuriated the reformers, who tried to label it the pig, fat and slow, something F-111 pilots would wear as a badge of honor, officially adopting the name F-111 Aardvark in 1996. Sorry, F-111 Aardvark.
Aardvark!
You happy?
Yes.
I said it. And though the reformers had done a successful job at thrashing the reputation of the F-111, it was not a plane without its faults. It was expensive, and it was considered by ground crews to be an absolute maintenance nightmare. In fact, it's no surprise when the...
Okay, so Desert Storm... The F-111 got him in for a kill. Oh my god. Okay, so Desert Storm was such an absolute beast of a class in terms of how to actually carry out operations like this. So before Desert Storm, Iraq had the fourth largest military on the planet. Okay, it was the fourth largest military on the planet, and everybody was sitting there talking about you know, how the Iraqis had a lot of Russian equipment, all this, all that. Everybody was kind of watching what was going to go down there. And I specify had. Because when the invasion happened into Kuwait, which was really what set things off, control win as soon as I can, Baron, I promise. From the moment the invasion kicked off, it lasted less than 100 hours. 100 hours. And quite simply put, the Iraqi army was... There wasn't even a fight. It wasn't even a fight. It wasn't even a curb stomping. Like, this will be the equivalent of Mike Tyson getting in the ring versus a newborn baby. Because the Iraqi army, there were more friendly fire deaths than there were combat casualties. Yeah. There were more of those. There's actually a highway that to this date is called the Highway of Death. Because what wound up happening is the Iraqi army got trapped and almost cut off. And the only place they had left to go was this one highway that ran back from Kuwait back into up towards Baghdad. And quite literally, A-10s just strafe that highway all day and all night. They just strafe the entire thing. Yeah, Desert Storm was what everybody thought Russia was going to do to Ukraine. They strafed that highway so badly that to this day it is called the Highway of Death. It is absolutely insane. A10 is God tier if there are no friendlies around. This is true. Oh my god. Let's go.
The F-111 was finally retired. The suicide rates among ground crew chiefs dropped significantly. But was it really as bad as the reformers claimed? Well, technically,
it was worse than
no.
Jarhead.
In fact, the reformers struggled for years to find ways to criticize it, so simply resorted to making stuff up. Their smoking gun was the failure of the F-111B, the Sea Pig. The Navy eventually refused to adopt the F-111 after deciding they no longer needed a tactical nuclear-capable strike bomber, and instead what they needed was a tactical nuclear-capable strike fighter. Remember those factions that were arguing at the Pentagon over fighter bombers and dedicated fighters?
Right.
By now they had come to an agreement to build the F-15, but the Navy didn't like this. The Air Force had brought in John Boyd, one of the more famous members of the Reformers Club, to help them design an aircraft based on all the ridiculous specifications that had been proposed. Now, I've never seen those specifications. They do exist in an archive somewhere, along with what I'm told is plans for an F-111 with podded engines, which sounds absolutely hilarious, but I can't get into that archive unless I am a serving member of the US military. Most military archives in the US are either closed, open only to military personnel, or so underfunded, understaffed, and badly organized that trying to find anything in them is like trying to find an exceptionally small piece of hay in an impossibly large-sized pile of needles. This is why I laugh when people tell me, "Oh, I've been to an archive, actually," because they think it's like a library and everything's organized. They're not expecting to be led into something akin to the back rooms and pointed to a large pile of cardboard boxes all stacked on top of each other, some of which are inevitably damp and contain more dead flies and should be legally allowed.
Yes.
So, if any 4-star generals are watching this and feel generous enough to grant me an advisory position that gives me a service rank and a DoD card so I can visit these archives, that would be greatly appreciated. It also means I
Do it. Just do it.
can technically apply for US citizenship for when I'm old and retired, because apparently you can buy a house in Alaska that's 200 miles from any known civilization, and that sounds quite pleasant if I'm honest. Anyway.
But you have to worry about the bears at that point. The bears and the aliens.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, so Boyd is dragged into the F-15 program. I'll talk about that in detail on a different day, but needless to say the plane Boyd and the rest of the reformers proposed, dubbed Project Redbird, had no missile payload and very little fuel. This was accepted at the time as the Air Force had been made development head of the project, and thus the F-15 was dictated as Air Force needs first, modified to Naval needs later. This caused the Navy to walk out on the program, and now hating the Air Force even more, decided they needed their own high-speed jet interceptor capable of ground attack with a variable geometry wing. The F-111 simply wasn't designed to be a fighter. It had never been part of the original specifications, so the Navy canned it and would go on to build the F-14. The reformers saw this as their smoking gun. The Navy had dumped the expensive can't dogfight flying pig and gone for the more sleek dogfighter jet with a gun. Of course, and yes, I am fully aware the F-14 has a lot of fans who are very dedicated and can write an extravagantly long paragraphs faster than I can breathe, so I'm just digging my own grave at this point. The F-14 wasn't all sunshine and roses. Fans of the F-14 tend to gloss over the early periods in which it was essentially just an expensive hangar queen. It was maintenance heavy, notoriously unreliable, and had a worse turning circle than the F-4 Phantom, an aircraft with a famously bad turning circle. But the thing is, the F-14 didn't need to be super maneuverable.
No.
In Iran, when it did encounter those highly maneuverable jet fighters that could dogfight like the reformers wanted, it won every single time. And not by outmaneuvering them, not by outturning them or using its gun, but because it could perform over-the-horizon attacks, striking at an enemy who weren't even aware they were being targeted. The reformers touted the F-14 because to them it was an agile gunfighter which proved that missiles and radar were dumb and expensive and that air battles were decided by turning circles in a dogfight. But in reality, the F-14 proved the exact opposite. The F-14 was a long-range missile assassin assassin. Even in red flag operations with international partners, NATO pilots would confess fearing a fight with the F-14 because it meant being hit by something you didn't know was there at a range you couldn't fire back at. And so it is with the F-111. Everything the reformers hated about it was because it didn't need to be what they thought it should be. It didn't need to be maneuverable. It didn't need to have the pilots visually identify the target by looking at the ground. It didn't need to carry a shitload of bombs to destroy a single target. It didn't need a long loiter time or a titanium bathtub to protect the crew against people with guns shooting up at it. It could fly fast, it could fly low, and it could strike a target with pinpoint precision.
Worm, you keep on saying this, and I have to agree with you. Oh, the fighter plane mafia was lying. Oh no, hold my pearls.
Ping out anything from buildings, tanks, factories, and fortified positions with a single bomb, and then hightailing it out of there before the enemy could return fire. It was everything the modern bomber needed to be, and it proved that precision bombing wasn't a fantasy, it was the future. But the march of time goes on. With improving technology, it was becoming somewhat obvious that even the idea of low-flying bombers would soon be obsolete. Look-down, shoot-down radar was fast becoming a thing. A radar system which, when mounted onto a high point or an aircraft, could effectively screen out ground clutter, and anything traveling close to the ground, under the radar, so to speak, that got caught in his radar sight, would effectively be lit up like a Christmas tree. The system had been around since the late 60s, and now with its widespread adoption, including by the Soviets, the idea of flying low to avoid radar was quickly becoming a thing of the past. The F-111 was still a vastly superior bomber compared to its contemporaries, but the lessons learned from its use had been learned. Cheaper aircraft could now deliver the same bombs with the same precision. The one thing the F-111 had been good at, flying low and fast, was no longer a trait exclusive to it. Although it would continue as a bomb truck, the aardvark was solely regulated to high-speed
Aardvark!
reconnaissance and electronic warfare, but even then the maintenance cost of the aircraft was so vast, the fleet was allegedly sucking up around 25% of the Air Force's total maintenance budget. It would be retired from US service in 1993, with the last of the F-111 still flying for the Australian Air Force until 2010. But the bomber wasn't dead. The problem had just become even more complicated. You can have a plane that can sit high up, directing radar beams at the ground, and can spot aircraft flying low, and a regular radar keeping track of anything flying high. How do you get a bomber through without being detected? I mean, yes, you can take advantage of terrain and fly through mountain passes and riverbeds, where even look-down radar has its limitations, but you can't always rely on the enemy having a neat little line of mountain passes leading directly to the target you want to bomb. Or if they do, being naive enough to not suspect you probably use it to bomb them, and either be patrolling it aggressively or have some sort of early warning system in place. Effectively, you need another solution. And I know you've been ever so patient as this video drives 20 miles away from the point and then kicks you out the car and tells you to walk back, but that is where our humble little F-117 finally comes in. Remember that? Remember what I was talking about before I started rambling?
Yes.
I am a terrible YouTuber. So, question was, why is stealth? Well, stealth is the solution to the next problem.
Yes.
If you can't avoid radar, make something radar can't see. Simple. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right?
Right.
Oh no, it's lemon, lemon, difficult lemon.
Damn it.
Radar can be tuned to detect something as small and as soft as a bird, which is essentially just a ball of feathers and anger. And if you can't hide a bird from radar, how do you hide a plane? Well, thankfully, in the 1940s, dates differ on who you ask, Lockheed, a company who builds planes, was approached by the American government and asked if they could build a plane. Now, normally, this wouldn't be a problem. Lockheed is really good at building planes. In fact, there's this big plane right outside their building to remind you that is what they do. But the plane the US wanted was a weird one. It didn't have any propellers. They wanted a jet plane. This was weird because the US military had spent most of the 1930s claiming the idea of jet engines was a fad. They were unreliable, too mechanically complex, and too fuel-hungry to ever work. And then the Americans went on a fact-finding mission to Britain. Apparently, they were looking to buy the Mosquito, though some sources do differ. During the meeting, one American general leaned over to one of the engineers and chuckled, "You know, some people say we should be investing in jet engines." To which the engineer replied, "You should. You want to see ours?" Now, did that happen? I don't know, probably not exactly like that. But the Americans got to see the Gloucester E-2839, Britain's experimental jet plane. And Immediately, they bought one. And then they took it to Lockheed and said, what can you do with this? Take the engine out, get rid of all this British shit, and make it more American. We want you to build us an all-American jet fighter. And Lockheed gently patted the general on the head and said, sure, we'll get right on that, sir. The problem was, Lockheed was busy making money. They were building planes. They were actually building planes for the British at the time, and they didn't feel like wasting all their money and some of their best engineers chasing a prototype for a plane that might never be built. It was madness. So what Lockheed did was it drove around America in a van collecting every sort of mentally unstable genius they could find.
Yay.
You've never been questioned by the authorities for building a nuclear reactor in your bedroom when you were 12. If you'd built a rocket and tried to launch your old school hamster into space. If you were the kind of person who spent all their time building paper airplanes, obsessing over the design until they could fly hundreds of meters away, and then pick them up and ran through your house making noises while in your 30s, then Lockheed was rapidly approaching your
40s.
location. They took all these aircraft engineers with questionable levels of sanity, dumped them into a circus tent, painted a large cartoon animal on the front, and watched to see what they would do. And thus, Lockheed Skunk Works was born. The aircraft they would produce included the P-38, the P-80, the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71, the D-21, the F...
The Blackbird is so damn sexy.
22, the F-35, the Sea Shadow, the whatever the fuck this thing is, and apparently a fusion reactor, because they had to save money on their electricity bill. Seriously. Go America. The general insanity of whatever comes out of Skunk Works is well known and highly revered. So if anyone was going to crack the radar problem, it was Skunk Works. And thankfully, they had been tinkering with the idea since the 1950s. Now this is where things get fucky.
Okay, the fucking
Skunk Works apparently doesn't have much luck in designing a stealth aircraft. The idea potentially could be possible, and they have some theories, but they can't quite work it out. And then one of them discovers a scientific paper, which basically unlocks the whole thing. Now, what this paper was is a subject of some debate, and I'm going to cover that for a second because it has all the hallmarks of some major fucky-wucky. The name I hear a lot is Russian scientist Peter Ruptsev, whose name I'm definitely saying wrong. It's the name that comes up a lot in documentaries, and it's the one mentioned by Thad Darger, a former pilot of the F-117, when he's going over the history of the plane. Coincidentally, it's also the name cited by Wikipedia. The source for that name appears to be, well, himself.
Oh, lovely. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Is Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell. This is the one cited by the Stealth Fighter Association, a non-profit organisation that documents the history of specifically the F-117, holds reunions for its pilots, and whose board of directors includes former pilots, engineers, and maintenance personnel. So on one hand, a scientist on the USSR who published his paper in the USSR, whom Skunk Works would not have been able to see until the late 90s, long after the plane was built, as cited by a dodgy source on the Internet Encyclopedia that anyone can edit, and is famous for being wrong precisely because anyone can edit it, or the work of a Scottish mathematician who died in 1879, long before the invention of both radar and aircraft. Now, Scotland does have a long list of inventions, some of which include the telephone, the steam engine, the fax machine, the kaleidoscope, penicillin, television, cloning, the MRI scanner, refrigeration, disposable contact lenses, the ATM, the flushing toilet, vacuum flasks, fingerprinting, comic books, and the concept of time itself, but I don't honestly believe Scotland was building
and golf
stealth bombers in 1879. Or were they? The work being cited is Maxwell's dynamic theory of electromagnetic fields, which talks about how magnetic fields travel through the air at the speed of light in waves, and the shape of those waves can mean different things. Unfortunately, he used a lot of big words that I don't understand, and I fell asleep while trying to read it, but basically the man discovered electromagnetic and radio waves. He is also considered one of the most intelligent men who ever lived, is the father of electrical engineering, special relativity, and quantum mechanics.
Yay!
Just for fun, one summer invented the color photograph. Albert Einstein considered him a mentor. He was also hilariously arrogant and didn't enjoy the company of anyone he thought was dumber than him, which, when you are the smartest man alive, is pretty much everyone.
Yay.
Yes, he's basically Scottish Rick Sanchez.
Marty! Get in the car, Marty! Get in the car!
Don't think too hard on that one. That said, the work of
I'm good now.
Peter Imtsev cannot be discredited because of a source on Wikipedia was a bit dodgy. The man was also a genius and was born at a time where radar and planes existed. His work specifically cites the reflection of electromagnetic waves. His work was supposedly published internationally because it was not considered by the Soviets to have any real military value. Boy, were they wrong. And since realizing their mistake, Russia has thrown almost every scientific award they can think of at the man's feet and have proudly added stealth technology to the list of Russian inventions, which I'm taking away from them because, as I'll remind you, the rule is it's who builds it first and gets it working, not comes up with the idea.
Right.
So which one of these guys should get credit for being the father of modern stealth? Well, none of them. Maxwell was a genius, but the work cited as a number of ciphers predicting how electromagnetic waves would react under certain circumstances. It was Skunk Works who deciphered them. Yevtsev was equally as brilliant, but his work was about radio wave reflections, not about stealth planes. It was Skunk Works who figured out how his theories could be applied to modern aircraft. It was Ed Martin, it was Ben Rich, it was Bill Schrodinger, it was Dennis Overhauser, as well as a number of other uncredited engineers who put it all together and figured it all out. Not anyone else. The work of Maxwell and Yevtsev may have laid the foundations, but they alone did not invent stealth aircraft. And I know that seems like a meaningless rant, but honestly, I felt like it was important to just get that out there. History can be a bit weird like this. Anyway, I'm rambling again.
That's okay.
So Skunkworks have got this idea that they could possibly build a plane that could go undetected by radar, solving the problem of the bomber not getting through.
Right.
But Lockheed don't fund random fantasies, so onto the shelf it goes. Up until about 1975, when McDonnell Douglas thinks they've cracked it. They propose to the Pentagon that they can build a plane that is radar invisible. Now DARPA get excited. This is exactly what they've been looking for. So they propose to several companies if they can build it, then they will helicopter in a shipping container full of cash from the black budget, which means it's tax-free. Now,
Yay!
McDonnell Douglas eventually drop out, claiming they just couldn't design or build the required aircraft, leaving just Northrop and Lockheed in the race, and both come up with competing designs. Now, the story behind Lockheed's design is famous enough. Most people probably know it by name, and if you said Hopeless Diamond, you were wrong. In fact, the history of the project is largely incorrect. According to DARPA themselves, in this wonderfully colourful poem they wrote, "A moth disappears against the bark of the tree of which it has landed. An octopus vanishes its skin, assuming the pattern and texture of its surroundings. That's stealth of an ancient and biological kind." I mean, whatever. Lockheed was not actually invited to take part. DARPA were not allowed to talk to Lockheed because of their work on the SR-71, and it wasn't until much later that they were finally granted permission by the CIA that they learned that Lockheed had been tinkering with something and got them involved. You want to seriously drop to your knees and thank every god you know and every star you see that they did this. Because as each one of those other companies dropped out, unable to crack it, only Northrop were able to build a working stealth plane, and it looked like this. The single ugliest aircraft ever made by man. And I include in that the Fairy Garnet. The Northrop Tactic Blue, nicknamed the Whale, was originally not a bomber, but a surveillance aircraft designed to replace the U-2 spy plane. And as you might expect, it flew like a brick. Attached to a cow, attached to an even bigger, angrier brick. With this at the helm, the advent of stealth would have been a generation of aircraft that looked like the magic school bus.
Gee, Miss Frizzle, I sure hope this is just a regular school trip.
No, cats, we're going to recon military targets in Kosovo!
Dude.
I digress. The stealth whale wouldn't make it into production. Northrop would fly it every day for about 2 years as if to try and prove it could fly and had its uses, but the army would never.
It looks like a duck that got laid out on the floor. Look at it. It looks like a damn duck that had just got splat on the floor, okay? 10 out of 10, we need more. Baron, we don't need more, okay? This thing seriously... Exactly, Alpha and Omega. Exactly. This is Sad Plane Noises, the plane, okay?
Ever adopt.
If you painted the front, if you painted the two back windows the color of the hull, and you painted the middle, it would look like eyes. What have they done with my boy? Okay? What have they done with my boy? This thing looks so sad. A pinto with wings, dear God, the paper duck! Yes, Blue Lick, this looks painful. It looks like a marital aid through factory error.
It now sits at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. Hangar 4, if you're interested. Oh. And to be fair to Northrop, the technology developed for it and the lessons learned in its use and its construction were later further developed into the B-2 Spirit, which took the concepts developed by the F-117 and ramped it up to 11. But getting back on topic, Lockheed have just been given the promise of a shitload of money and getting to kick their market rival Northrop in the shins. And best of all, their insane asylum disguised as an aircraft factory, Skunk Works, was getting bored of the SR-71 and were kicking around looking for things to do. And when Skunk Works gets bored, that's when you start worrying. So, a shiny new project that should take them years of pissing around time should do just the trick. And what do you mean they've already built something? It took Skunk Works a little over a year produce a model. The project was called Harvey, after the 1950s film Harvey, about a giant rabbit that only the lead character could see. But after a long discussion and quite a lot of coffee, Lockheed were able to convince Skunk Works to build a plane as opposed to a giant invisible rabbit, and thus work began. That's not actually true. According to Jack Twigg, the former project manager of the Half Blue project, the codename Harvey was completely made up by the Pentagon. No one on the project ever...
Don't talk about the Self-Destroyer's design, okay? Please, don't talk about the Zimwalt. The Zimwalt... I'm going to talk about the Zimwalt at some point when I am not in a lot of pain and I have a box of tissues nearby me.
Refer to it as such, though I'd already written that joke by the time I learned that, so I wasn't going to change it, because goddamn, that was funny, right? I laughed! Stop judging me! In a book written by Ben Rich, who was the head of Skunk Works in 1975, no one in Lockheed even knew that DARPA was putting out contracts for stealth planes, until their in-house Soviet weapons expert literally blew the door down and told them all about it. He'd learned because the other companies DARPA had invited to compete in the contract, Fairchild and Grumman, had bowed out, but General Electric was causing a stink because they claimed they could do it with electromagnetic waves.
Yay.
General Electric were attempting to build a cloaking device with magnets. Go
Where is ICP when you need them?
America. Either way, their engineers blabbed, and for some reason DARPA didn't think that the idea they were putting out contracts for stealth planes should be kept top secret. So the hobbyist community started to learn about it, and then they started coming up with ideas on what it would look like, which eventually evolved into what is widely considered to be the first ever true meme of non-credible defense, the F-19. Which you can still buy models of. It's one of the best-selling models of all time. Journalists used to take models of it to the press conferences and be like, we can buy models of it, why can't you just admit that it's real? Which I completely understand. I mean, I can buy all these models of Catboys everywhere, and yet NASA still refuses to tell me where the portal to the Catboy dimension is, no matter how many letters I send. Why won't you tell me, NASA? What are you hiding from me?
Where's the Catboy dimension? Oh, hell no! Look at that! I'm not... No.
Either way, Lockheed were now in the race. And now, we finally get
to the part
that everybody knows after... Jesus, how long have I been rambling? Why are you subscribed to me? I am an awful YouTuber, seriously.
Because we love you. You fucking ridiculous pig.
Bill Schroeder was able to sketch out a design for an aircraft that Skunk Works believed would have a low radar signature, which took advantage of something called faceting, a method which, rather than absorb or nullify radar signatures, deflected them away from the return path of enemy radar, meaning that array never got a return signal, and thus should see nothing. With this sketch, they ran the design through Lockheed's computers, trying to mathematically work out the most optimal angles. This was then converted into a model which was called the Hopeless Diamond. Dubbed that for the regular engineers at Lockheed hated its angular shape. They liked smooth, curved surfaces. This thing was all flat and angular and something aerodynamics. So they believed that A, it wouldn't work, and B, it wouldn't fly. So they set up a big pole, put the plane on top, and fired a radar beam at it. After a bit of adjusting, they got a return on the pole. And then finally, the plane popped up on radar. It gave a weak return roughly the size of a bird, but for some reason the plane was appearing several feet above the pole. The eyes of every engineer slowly turned to look at the model, and there was a bird perched on top of it. The plane was completely invisible to radar. DARPA would test
That is, yeah.
both designs, and though promising, Northrop's design was not completely as stealthy as advertised. At certain angles, it was detectable, and DARPA had concerns that the engineers working on the project were inexperienced on working under top-secret protocols. This was not a concern for Lockheed, whose demonstration model passed every test and was subsequently declared the winner. The project was dubbed Have Blue, and finally top-secret protocols were put in place, officially making it a black project. In 1988, it was finally revealed to the public, and thus the legend of the Nighthawk was born.
Oh, it's such a
And
sexy
then
ish.
the argument began.
Yes, here it comes.
The F-117 was a bomber that, in reality, did not exactly improve on the ideology of what a bomber is. For all rights and purposes, the F-111 was vastly superior in terms of bombing capability, and the reformers would always latch on to this. World War II bombers, even the shit ones, had larger bomb capacities. The F-117 could only carry 2 bombs. It was slow, it was fuel hungry, and it was a maintenance nightmare. It was one of the most temperamental aircrafts ever made, and it came at a cost of roughly $122 million in 1998 money,
Yeah.
depending on which source you look at. The cost was so high because of the amount of advanced computers required to fly it. The weird angular design made it stealthy, but not exactly aerodynamic, so much so that the prototypes were known as the Wobbly Goblins. They were inhumanely difficult to fly, and it was only because of the aircraft's fly-by-wire system that it was capable of flight at all. And this idea of stealth, the reformers claimed, was just a gimmick, an expensive gimmick, and one that didn't really come with any great advantage. Look-down radar is required to be high up on another aircraft, which isn't really a problem if the enemy can't launch any because you're dominating the skies with your highly efficient jet fighters. And they
I
claim
know, Alpha
once the
Omega,
Soviets
what the
learned
hell?
about this new stealth fighter, it wouldn't take them long to retune their radars, or develop new radar systems, or that stealth systems incorporated by Lockheed were vulnerable to certain lower frequencies and techniques used by highly powered or older generation radar systems. In essence, it wasn't stealthy at all. And in 1999, in the skies over Serbia, the reformers would get their vindication. It's 1999. A war in Yugoslavia has been raging since February of the previous year. Now,
Yep.
I'm not going to get into all the nuance and politics of that war or the situation which caused its build-up. What I will say is the Wikipedia article for the Kosovo War has to be one of the longest on the site, and has a section on known mass graves. That should give you some clues as to why I'm maybe skipping it. It would take me several hours to explain, and people would still get mad at me in the comments.
Yeah.
Needless to say, NATO intervenes in a long and aggressive bombing
NATO intervened way after it should have. I mean, way after it should have.
campaign against military targets in Serbia begins. Part of this NATO deployment is a section of F-117s. Weather is bad and they are mostly flying at night. Serbian air defense is using mostly outdated and low-tech equipment. Maintenance of that equipment is expected to be very bad, and therefore not really a threat. Regular non-stealth aircraft have been flying in and out and harassing the radar stations with seed weapons, auto-seeking missiles specifically designed to home in on radar installations, so no one was expecting any problems. With the F-117s being radar invisible, they should have no issues. And that was the general feeling on the night of March the 27th, 1999, when a squadron of 4 F-117s entered Serbian airspace. They knew the Serbian air defenses would be hunting them, but they expected almost total immunity. The black jets remained grouped until they hit the border, and then each split off, moving towards their own designated targets. And as one of those F-117s turned to home in on their designated target, something very interesting happened. The pilot spotted a missile flying towards them.
That's
there were
bad.
no other planes in the air, nothing nearby. This was a radar-guided missile locking on to him. Through sheer luck, the first missile missed. The second one did not. And though the pilot bailed and was later rescued, this was the first recorded shootdown of an F-117, the first combat loss of a stealth fighter. And what had done it was nothing more than a simple, outdated radar SAM site from the 1960s, operating in low-frequency mode. It was a national embarrassment. Overnight, the man who had been manning the battery, Colonel Zoltan Dani, had become a national hero. It was a massive propaganda victory for Serbia, who still celebrate it to this day. And for the reformers, it was all the proof they needed. If an older radar system could shoot down an F-117, then the whole stealth thing was really just an expensive gimmick. And that was the bottom line. Or was it? Okay, this may seem a bit like a diversion, but in 1966, England won the Football World Cup.
Okay.
Soccer, to my American audience, beating Germany 4-2. I mean, they've never won it again, but this single victory, even though it was nearly 60 years ago, even though most of the players and the people at the match have now since passed away, is as much ingrained into English culture as tea and biscuits. It's referenced almost constantly. Anytime there is a match between England and Germany, chants of 2 world wars and 1 World Cup, Germany the air. It even almost made it into the national anthem. The Germans, however, find this rather surprising. I mean, not only are they completely unaware of this culture, they just don't really get what the big deal is. They don't consider 1966 to be one of their great...
Rest in peace to the Brazilian team. Rest in peace to Brazil. 7-1. We thought we knew you so well. Rest in peace.
Football losses, nor do they consider England to be one of their greatest rivals. Germany has won the Football World Cup 4 times. But you see, because it's England, and England sees that one victory as an equal to that of winning the Second World War, and Germany simply doesn't care, it's meant that England is pretty much at liberty to dictate how the whole thing went down. They produce books, films, documentaries, interview the players, but because it's such a strong point of national pride, it all has to be structured in a way that doesn't cause upset to Big Barry and the Brexit bunch, because that's your target audience. And because there is no audience for the opposite, there has never really been much opposition or critique of the facts the English present. Simply put, no one cares. And the shootdown of the F-117 over Serbia is pretty much like that. In Serbia, that one shootdown is a point of national pride beyond almost anything else. They have produced countless books and documentaries about it. They've got a museum dedicated to it. The man who did it is a national hero. And there are reasons for this. England still froths at the mouth over 1966 because England believes it is the best at football. They invented it. They are the only country which plays it correctly, even if though since 1930 they have lost 21 out of the 22 World Cups, a fact they proudly ignore because in their mind they believe that Germany is somehow, for some reason, still coping and seething at this one loss. The idea that they aren't and don't care is something many football fans in England would find deeply insulting. And with the F-117 shootdown, it kind of allows Serbia to do the same. You can't look at videos or pictures of the F-117 on the internet without a Serb in the comments reminding you that they shot one down. In their mind, they still believe that the United States of America, the most powerful military force on the planet, is still coping and seething that Serbia, little Serbia with its backwards military, was able to take down one of their most advanced fighter jets.
Okay.
It also helps gloss over the realities of the Kosovo War that many people in Serbia still feel uncomfortable with. So discussions of the Kosovo War are dominated by the tale of Zoltan Dani and the night they shot down a stealth jet and how...
Yeah, not the rest of it. We don't want to talk about the rest of it. Definitely don't want to do that.
clever the Serbs were and how much America underestimated them over things like war crimes. And because no one else really cares, the Serbs have been allowed to get away with stating their version of the story as objective fact with little to no cross-examination. And this has been signal boosted in the US by the Reformers Club because it helped demonstrate their narrative.
Right.
But you see, there is a bit of nuance to this whole reality.
Let's go.
Shootdown wasn't exactly as simple as it may seem. For one, the US had been flying in and out of the same airbase every night. Unknown to them, the base was being watched. Serbian spies were held up in a house which overlooked the runway, and from their position they could see what was taking off and what was landing. That night, no other planes left the runway outside of the F-117s. They quickly passed this information along to their commanders. Furthermore, the American bombers took the same path every night, so the Serbians would know exactly which direction they would come from and roughly how long it would be before they arrived. Now knowing the skies would be clear outside of the Nighthawks, every battery in Serbia switched to low frequency mode. They knew they had no other threats to deal with. They knew they could be more active with their radars, as no Sea aircraft were operating that night, which means when the F-117 in question, ducking and weaving through hills and valleys, briefly showed up as an unidentifiable smudge on a local radar, they knew exactly what they were looking at. They knew which direction it was going, and the air defense battery nearby knew exactly where to point his radar. And well, this is the part the reformers tend to forget. Danny flipped on his radar. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. Twice he activated his radar and it told him nothing was there. Had Danny been following standard procedure, turning his radar on for 2 sweeps meant he was now lit up like a Christmas tree. His position was compromised and most likely a Sea aircraft was on its way to deliver several hundred pounds of radar-seeking death. He now needed to move, and move quickly. But he knew the skies were clear. He knew there were no Sea aircraft, just the Nighthawks. So he turned his radar on again. And this time, he got something. By a startling coincidence, at the exact time Danny had turned his radar on, the F-117 had its bomb bay doors open. One brief moment in that aircraft's journey where it would be visible on radar. To explain just how lucky a shot in the dark this was, the F-117 did not operate like other bombers, where you flip the switch, the doors open, and the bombs drop. The F-117 carries exactly 2 bombs, typically GBU-12 paveways. These are laser-guided bombs. The system on board the aircraft, once the target has been selected, will automatically deploy the bomb in the most optimal flight path, and then drop the bombs automatically. The trigger on the F-117 is not a trigger, so to speak. It simply gives the plane permission to fire. If that has been pressed, the doors open, the bombs drop, and the second those bombs are clear of the doors, they close. In some cases, those doors can be open for less than a second. The shootdown of the F-117 over Serbia was a case of extreme luck and no small part of negligence on the part of NATO. The detection of the F-117 had absolutely nothing to do with the fact the radar was operating in low frequency mode. But that did not stop the reformers, who even today still bang on about the follies of stealth, how old radar systems and even systems from the Second World War can detect them. You even see this when people talk about modern stealth aircraft like the F-35. Herder, my World War II radar can detect it.
Oh my god.
And because of this, and because of the propaganda around the shootdown, the system that did it, the S-125 Naval, has remained in service. It's a 60-year-old system by now. In fact, if you're a small country with some spare cash, Russia will sell you a slightly upgraded version of this exact weapon system, advertised as anti-stealth. Countries that still operate it include Azerbaijan, Cuba, Bulgaria, Libya, India, Moldova, North Korea, Serbia, Syria, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Venezuela, Yemen, and even Vietnam. Even the modern S-400 systems currently in use by Russia, and systems built off it like the ones used in China, still follow similar design ideologies, still follow that same principle about what stealth is weak to, and it doesn't work. If America needed to invade any of these countries and stealth bombers were part of its campaign, all those countries, all those operators have been trained to immediately switch to lower frequency, and that is not something you want to do. A lower radar frequency can give you a much higher RCS return on any aircraft you might be looking at, but that comes with a significant downside. Lower frequency radar cannot penetrate cloud or rain. It can be affected by flocks of birds, waving trees, high wind, and even direct sunlight. But even if all the conditions are perfect, a lower frequency radar is not just going to pick up planes, it will pick up absolutely everything.
In 1983, it was because of this type of radar that Russia nearly not launched nukes, okay? It was because of this kind of radar that Russia almost launched nukes on us.
Including things like radio waves, satellite televisions, phone calls, electromagnetic interference from home computers, power lines, everything like that. If you don't have a system in place to screen all that out, which typically countries still using the S-125 Naval won't have access to, or would otherwise be typically unable to afford, you're left with a man or a woman staring at a screen that has now just become alive with radar blips, trying to find the one blip on the screen that might be a plane in the brief window you have while the radar is on. The radar the Serbs used hit the F-117 twice and didn't see it. Even in the lower frequency, the F-117 remained invisible until it opened its bomb bay doors, and Lockheed knew that. The Hopeless Diamond model they tested had been tested in the lower frequency band, and its radar return was less than the size of a bird's eye. But because of the story, countries and militaries around the world all operate radar missile defense systems, fully believing they can defend themselves against stealth technology that has never been proven to work.
And I fully encourage this. Keep on doing dumb shit. Go ahead.
And that's why, in my opinion, the reformers have been allowed to get away with this for as long as they have.
Hey,
During
Michael.
the Cold War, it became a necessary part of psychological warfare
Sounds
between
good,
the
bud.
Soviets and the US to overestimate what their equipment was capable of. The Soviets believed if the Americans constantly thought they were playing catch-up, it would deter them from staging an invasion, and with any luck would spend so much money trying to build up uneconomical superweapons, they would bankrupt themselves in the process, and then regular Americans living in poverty through lack of public funding would rise up in a populist revolt. This became such a big thing that overstating what their equipment can do has become part of Russian culture. They know their equipment cannot do what is advertised, but they still believe it to be part of some background psychological warfare to intimidate the Americans. And the worst part is, they believe everyone else is doing exactly the same. What they have become increasingly unaware of is when America says its equipment can do certain things, it is more likely an understatement of what it is actually capable of.
Unrelentingly true. I have very funny stories.
But as long as Russia had the designer of the greatest fighter plane ever made coming forth to rant on Russia Today about how weak and useless Western military technology was, then the illusion would always remain intact. And it's all utter nonsense. The anti-stealth systems that Russia and those named countries think they have is just a regular SAM system, the same kind of system that NATO aircraft have been training to overcome for 60 years. And they've gotten very good at it. And I'd like to say that was the plan all along. I'd love to give credit to some genius, because if it was planned, then this would have been the greatest psyops the world has ever seen. But I don't think it was. I think this is just how humans work. Military advisors are 10 a penny, quite literally in some cases. Everyone even remotely connected to the military in some regard thinks they know a thing or two, puts on a shirt and tie, and starts calling themselves an advisor. And it's great to have a few military advisors surround you. It gives you credibility, gives you comfort, especially when they rattle off their expertise about where they served and who with, and all the stuff they did, etc, etc. But the vast majority of these guys don't know a damn thing. Typically, their knowledge is based on limited personal experience, which comes from brief snapshots of a single military operation, with no real knowledge to the overall big picture, which many regard with a certain level of disdain. They can anecdote a bunch of stuff, sure, they can relate everything back to a story that happened to some guys some time ago, they can even identify all the guns and tanks and tell you all their history, but the reality is half these guys come cheap because they have next to no idea what the jamboree fuckaroo they are talking about. It's a big leap.
That's a statement. Imagine if we built our proportional to what Russia is actually capable of. Dude, a busted up mint jalopy Jeep Cherokee with a slingshot on the roof, I think could do it.
Leap going from knowing how to...
Seriously, how many times do we have to go through this with everybody? How many times do we have to see this happen? I'll tell you this. God, I'm not going to get into it. Oh, God, people think China's a threat.
Strip a 50 cal to running an actual military, to go from naming all the specific parts of an Abrams to being able to predict the future movements of Xi
Hey,
Jinping.
Geek, what's up,
The
bud?
majority of the time, the actual advice they give goes over the heads of the companies they work for, with bitter few exceptions. The majority of former US colonels and NCOs who end up working as advisors are not hired because they are so brilliant or have any unique insight. It's because the company employing them wants to take advantage of their connections when bidding on government contracts. That's it. I mean, look at Ukraine. How many of these fuckers got everything wrong and still persistently make incorrect predictions, wanking on and on and on about how tanks are useless and drones are the future, without ever really knowing why drones are being so effective right now.
Yes.
And so it was with anti-stealth stuff. They knew this one example where one got shot down by this specific system, knew it had something to do with low-frequency radar, put two and two together, and got 7. They knew the surface logic, essentially, but didn't understand the full circumstances. And as time has moved on, the F-117 has been gradually retired. Though a breakthrough in aviation and military technology, it was not exactly the greatest plane in the world. It was furiously expensive, so expensive in fact Reagan attempted to offset costs by making it a joint venture with the Brits, if they paid for it. They said no. It was a maintenance nightmare. They were costly to run, they broke down all the time. I mean,
Rip up, if you only knew. If you only knew. Everybody flips out so much about what China's military is capable of. Like, what they think they're capable of. What they think they're capable of. China, I held in lesser esteem than Russia before Russia embarrassed the fuck out of itself on a worldwide stage.
Every pilot I've ever seen interviewed admitted it was rare that on long flights, everything would still be working by the time you landed, assuming it even had been when you took off. It also lacked warning systems, it didn't have a radar, countermeasures, or could even fight other planes. It couldn't even go supersonic. The Air Force needed it to be more. And with the age of advanced computing, it became easier to combine faceting with more aerodynamic shapes. The F-117 was replaced by the F-22, which could go supersonic. It could fight other planes. It had a radar, it had countermeasures, it had a warning system that could tell if it was being locked onto. It was more aerodynamically sound, and it had an RCS signature even smaller than an F-117. And so the humble Nighthawk found itself outdated. And even yet, this is, in my opinion, still one of the most beautiful and striking planes ever made. It is quite possibly the most groundbreaking plane ever made, and in every theater it operated in, the stealth worked. And though Serbia shot one down, the Nighthawks continued to fly almost every other night. They never shot another one down. Believe you me, they tried. And though the plane is retired, keep in mind this was built in the 1970s, and in spite of all that time that has passed, no one has been able to replicate it. Russia tried and failed. China operates a modification of one of Russia's failed prototypes and claims it's stealthy, but they claim a lot of things. Britain got close with the P-125 and later the replica. Both would never be built, and the technology developed for them would eventually be recycled into the F-35 program. But all those prototypes did was prove the Brits got their maths right. It's a bit of a leap going from getting the math right to actually building it. The Su-57 is probably the best example of that. The computer models the Russians developed are probably telling them that this should be a very stealthy aircraft, but they just lack the expertise to follow through. Animarchy is doing a feature-length video on how they fucked up and why, so I'll defer to him. But the point is, every nation has, at some point, tried, and has been trying for near enough 40 years now. China, Russia, Turkey, Japan, Britain, France, and even Sweden have all attempted, and they have all failed. They all failed to build what this one little team were able to achieve back in the 1970s. But more important than that, there is one final chapter to this aircraft. This is the F-104 Starfighter. I did say we'd get to it, and this is one of the worst planes ever made by man. In my opinion, it's the single plane I hate the most. It was designed to offer the world a lightweight, low-technology fighter to compete against the likes of the MiG-15 and MiG-17. It was an all-weather aircraft and the first production aircraft to break Mach 2. It was built on the experience of fighter pilots in Korea and was the end result of thousands of hours of comprehensive study and development of wing and fuselage designs and testing. And as a result, it offered something no other jet in the world could. It could climb faster than any other aircraft, fly faster than any other aircraft, and fly higher than any other aircraft. And it could perform equally at both high and low altitudes. It was an absolute record breaker. But it had one major problem. Its landing speed was also its stall speed. Because of its tiny stubby wings, if the plane moved too slowly, it would simply not generate the lift required to remain airborne and would drop like a stone. Recovery in a stall was almost impossible, which led to a high rate of casualties for the pilots, as bringing this thing into land required a great deal of skill and concentration. The German Luftwaffe would suffer the highest casualty rate, losing 116 of its pilots to crashed landings. But that wasn't the worst of it. You see, so successful was this aircraft that it basically became Europe's jet fighter. And being that every European country now had a high-performance, low-cost jet fighter that could rival the very best of Soviet designs, there was no need for a lot of the European designs that were being prototyped. So things like
Exen Chattanooga. Dude, why? Just why?
The SR-53, a British fighter jet that was half rocket engine, or the VJ-101, a German Mach 2 capable VTOL aircraft, as well as a VTOL transport, the DO-31, were cancelled. And worst of it was that the F-104 didn't replace all of those by its own merit. While fast, it was about as maneuverable as a drunk cow behind the wheel of a Renault Twingo. It was a fairly mediocre fighter, and the US mothballed it pretty quickly. But the reason it became Europe's jet fighter of choice was that Lockheed actually managed to secure all those contracts for foreign service of the F-104 by paying huge bribes to various political officials across Europe. It was a massive political scandal, and already taking a beating with the failure of the TriStar commercial jet, Lockheed were now about $2 billion in the red. They had recently been bought out by the Textron Corporation, who were in the process of selling off Lockheed's assets and had plans to strip the company down for anything valuable before writing it off as a tax break.
Wow.
This was around the time that Skunk Works heard about that stealth plane contract. The F-117 was a risk. It was not only the first true stealth jet, it was the jet that saved Lockheed as a company. Without it, they and Skunk Works simply wouldn't exist, and many of the projects that have come out of it in recent years probably wouldn't have existed either. And that's why, to me, this will always be my favourite plane. The Nighthawk may now only exist in museums, some still do fly to simulate enemy stealth planes and training missions, but it's kind of weird to know that this aged, outdated, and remarkably beautiful, almost piece of art has yet to be surpassed by anyone who's tried. Also because it looks sick as fuck.
Yeah, it does.
I
It
used
really
a modern
does.
term. Do kids still say that?
Yes.
Do kids still say that? I don't know. But now I'm cool. Okay, so this is just a quick post-production addendum to try and curtail some of the comments that I'm probably going to get. Now, okay, I know there's some basic stuff. This is actually called a gannet, not a garnet. I don't know why I said garnet, but, you know, I can be a bit silly sometimes. Also, I think most people would agree that the most iconic American aircraft carrier is probably the Nimitz, not the Forrestal. But, you know, whatever. I actually want to...
It depends on what generation you're from. The Forrestal would have been it, the Nimitz, and in about 10 years, they're going to say the Ford.
touch on this thing, the aardvark system not being able to detect the F-35 and similar stealth planes because it operates on the principle of what they think works versus what actually works. Now, every time I say literally anything on Russian technology, I get about 1 billion comments from sudden experts in Russian weapons, all of whom have these very generic profiles, terrible grammar, and operate exclusively between the hours of 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Moscow Standard Time. So to explain, the S-400 system is the missile system, not the radar. The stealth-beating radar it comes attached to is called the Naval-M. This is 3 different radar systems that operate in conjunction with each other. The main anti-stealth one being something called long wavelength radar, which typically operates in the VHF band. Radar has different bandwidths, okay? It's complicated, I'm not going to get into it.
Yeah,
so
it's
VHF radar, this is the herder, my Second World War radar that the bullshit radar like to talk about. It's huge, okay? It looks like this. It's an absolutely massive array. It requires huge amounts of power, but it can detect stealth planes because things like radar absorbing material and faceting do have a limited effect on stuff like this. But here's the problem. Well, all that's fine in principle. You can say, yes, my World War II radar can detect stealth planes. What that radar cannot do is give you a clear picture of what it is it's looking at,
right,
where it is, how fast it's going, how high up it is. It cannot say, for example, provide targeting information to a missile. It can only say, yes, something is vaguely in that direction somewhere. If this is the kind of system you're going to run, you've got 3 options when it pings something. Now, the first is to fire a big missile into that vague area, which could be anything from 5 to 200 square miles, and hope that the missile's onboard targeting system sees something and locks onto it, which is not going to happen, okay? Option 2, you send a squadron of planes to go have a look and hope that they can deal with the situation when it arises. Or,
no, Gerald R. Ford class.
You know, they're dead. So what Russia does is option 3. It sets up a bunch of other radar systems, all operating in different frequencies, and uses those to try and triangulate something that narrows down the search area, which is all done by things like Doppler radars, which have their own weaknesses, or things like the Kasta 2E, which is the radar system that Russia's hyping up as the big anti-stealth radar, it's literally just a regular radar system which operates.
And frankly, at this point, I really don't want to hear anybody from Russia talking about how great their technology is. I don't want to hear a damn word from anybody talking about how great Russian technology is. We've seen how great it is.
Rates in low frequency mode, typically in the L and X band, which again has difficulty providing targeting information to a missile system and has never been proven to work. You also have the problem that low frequency, high powered radar systems like this generate a lot of noise. They are very easy to detect. So if what you're pinging with it has anti-radiation missiles or an electronic warfare package, for example, if it's an F-35, then you can't get an accurate picture of what they are, but they now know exactly where you are. They have all the targeting data they need. That massive radar system has a couple of minutes left to live at best. You're gonna have, as soon as you ping something, once you know where it is, you gotta pack that thing up, you gotta move as fast as possible. And that ain't easy when your radar system's that size. Trust me. The system works in principle, but the reality might be a little bit different.
Hive Mind, Death the Kid, and Captain Commander. You guys are twins. I'm glad to reunite you.
Russia has never faced stealth jets. It has never built a working stealth jet to test these systems on. It has never been able to prove that such a system works. And given Russia's track record on its claims of military prowess, I'd be hard pushed to believe anything they say. Now that said, there is no such thing as perfect stealth. A regular radar system will detect a stealth plane within a certain range. That's just inevitable, okay? But that range is typically very short, a lot shorter than what most people think. And this means there can be hidden gaps in enemy air defenses. Modern assessments have estimated, based on information the US has about the S-400 system, because it has allies which do operate it and do know what it's capable of, have said you could get a target lock on an F-35 if the aircraft is flying within 20 miles of the radar, and the pilot is the biggest dumbass on the planet, is ignoring all the warnings that the plane is giving off that it's being spotted by a radar system, which is something that even older generations of planes could do. 20 miles may seem a lot, but you need to understand the Russians claim the S-400 can detect stealth planes within 200 miles. So there's a bit of a discrepancy there. But stealth is less about not being detected and more about delaying that detection long enough that you can perform your mission and then get the hell out of there before the enemy can react to it. One thing about the F-117 shootdown that the Serbs tend to forget about is that the F-117 in question had already destroyed its target, which was a command post. So even though the Nighthawk was shot down, the shootdown didn't really achieve anything. I mean, the target was still hit and was destroyed. Anyway, I think that's everything, but feel free to whine at me in the comments because I'm sure I've probably missed something. And you know what it's like. You missed the thing you didn't talk about. Something. I've already drawn you as the soya boy. Whatever. Like, I'm sorry this took so long to get out. Happy New Year, I guess. Thanks for watching. Buy game subs. Gamer subs. Call gamer subs. I drink it all. It's really nice, okay? Get the guacamole gamer fart. It's the best flavor.
Okay. So, here's the deal. Okay, this is just the real deal. When I got out of the military, my dad was, me and my dad would talk about threats, all this other kind of stuff, international threats, every which way. And I kept on telling him, Dad, Russia is not the same anymore. They're just not the same anymore. They have not been the same. He talked to me about China. I said, China's not going to be a threat for a long time now. No matter what they say, no matter what. So basically, okay, so let me just iron this out. If you've been in the West for about 15 minutes, you've seen a news report, and our media is driven by not truth or facts anymore. It's by outrage and fear. That's what drives clicks. That's what drives views for the news media. So, of course, they reported on every single time Putin had his eyebrow twitch as a sign that he was getting ready to go to war, and then he goes to war with Ukraine, can't even make it to Kiev without running out of gas, and everybody's stunned about it. Everybody's stunned about it. And in the meantime, I'm just sitting there just pointing at the TV like, good God, they're even worse than I thought. It's bad when I have a low opinion of you and you screw up that low opinion by behaving actually worse. It is absolutely comical. It stopped being funny to me after the second week of this. it stopped being, like, with the whole Russia-Ukraine war, it stopped being funny to me at how bad they were performing. It actually just kept on getting sadder and sadder. And it keeps getting sadder and sadder. I stopped looking at the updates because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's another example of real life is stranger than fiction. And they do the same thing with China. Continuously. Oh, China could invade Taiwan at any moment. No, they couldn't. Every single satellite that the United States have and every single one of our allies have, every single plane, every single asset that we have on the ground, and people with binoculars in Taiwan would literally have to get drunk for about a period of 2 to 4 months for China to actually do an invasion within 24 hours that would actually surprise anybody in the world. It's still just asinine to me every single time they try to hype up threats. Just hype up these threats. Be afraid. You don't have to be afraid. China's water is brown water alone for the most part. They have very few ships that can travel on blue water. And if you don't know what that is, China's navy can barely operate in the open ocean. They are invading shit, okay? It would take them 2 to 4 months to muster the 1 million men it would take to invade Taiwan. And we would see it on every single solitary... I mean, there'd be no way they could keep this a secret. It'd be literally... And they don't know how to begin with. They just don't know how to begin... Oh, God. And they keep on screwing around with India, which is not going to work out in their favor, because eventually, if India gets tired of them, it's not going to be us that does China. It's going to be India that does China in, because, yes, China's carriers still don't work. China's carriers still don't work. China's carriers... Oh my God. It's almost embarrassing too, because now China's claiming they have the largest navy in the world. That's funny. It's absolutely hilarious. At this point, if China tried to invade Taiwan, it would be so unrelentingly sad. If they had some sort of land bridge, yeah, feasibly they could get away with doing some stuff, but it's not a land bridge, okay? Yes, tofu dregs. I watched a video the other day of, China, a good portion of China's GDP is wrapped up in the real estate market. Every single one of the real estate investors are billions of dollars into the hole because they keep on building tofu dregs just to keep on building, because so much of their GDP is wrapped up in real estate. So much of their GDP is wrapped up on real estate. Yes, China would have to pull a landing on a scale greater than Normandy without anyone seeing or intervening at all. They would need at least 1 million men. They don't have any experienced infantry. They have not been involved in a war since Korea that, was any kind of size. Anytime they have gotten into any kind of border dispute with India, India has stomped their lights out continuously. We don't need to talk about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, okay? We don't need to. We just don't need to. Electromagnetic catapults that freeze halfway they're trying to launch a plane. Yep, that too. They can talk about all this. They can talk about all this stuff all day long till the end of time, and it doesn't matter a damn bit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. China can, this is oh my God. China Uncensored called it too. Yeah. what is this? You asked about the song F-14 weapon theme. Oh, nice. FF-14. Oh, okay, good. And see, the horrific thing about it is, I had the feeling I had about Russia like in the early 2000s, because I was reading some stuff and I drew like a lot of conclusions got drawn just based off our the way that the United States employs weapons versus how they employ weapons. What are the terms? I don't know, Howard. I don't know. Isn't India on the list of the 10 strongest militaries in the world? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The sheer fact of the matter is, we just have a really, really, really addictive need for our news media saying, basically talking about, we should be afraid of this country for this reason. We should be afraid of this country for this is. Apparently, China's military arsenal is about on par with Russia's. Actually, Andrew, it's worse. It's actually worse, to be quite honest with you. And the thing about it is, also, China has no experience. Like Russia, at least. I say at least, and then it's like, I can't say anything positive about it, because watching Russia's military strategy versus the Ukraine is like watching. I can't even come up with an analogy that ridiculous. It is so unrelentingly bad. Landlocked countries, J24, if China went to war, India would stomp them. India, because, well, not only because India would have the United States right there with them, but India's military has been training to fight China for 70 years at this point. For 70 years they've been training for this. So yes, if India went to war with China, India would stomp them completely out. Didn't China find water in the missiles? That and other shit too. They say that Chinese can beat the Yanks because of the Korean War. Yes, congratulations. You sent 2 times the number, took 4 times the casualties. Congratulations. Oh, it was so stupid. Even though they haven't gone to war with anyone, explain why they haven't exported anything. Yeah. Warspite has a history of ramming things. I know that, bro. No, clone. Watching paint dry is not Russia's idea of war. Starving and then having to loot a convenience store and get snack cakes because they don't understand that you need logistics in a war is how Russia wages war, apparently. I haven't seen anything that damned incompetent in my life. People appointed to high levels of the government couldn't take the damned Russian army from the Russian border to Kiev, which is a shorter drive than it is from Miami to Orlando, Florida. Get the fuck out of here. Alright, Indian men make Chinese soldiers flee with sticks. This is true, Blue Lick. No, like, okay, so here's the thing. Like, China's time where it can actually do something is limited because their economy is... If the Chinese economy doesn't start taking some major hits, and it could completely collapse because it's so much of their economy is wrapped up in real estate. It's just, don't remind me of that, Cobalt, my God. Don't remind me of that. Oh my God. Black Wolf, if you want to know what just go look up tofu dregs. That is yeah, go look up tofu dregs, cuz that's going to tell you about the Chinese, about I don't remember how much of a percentage it is of the Chinese economy, but it's wrapped up in those buildings. There are ghost towns in China that have been built that are completely unoccupied. they just built the buildings. They just flat out built the buildings. It's insane. Xi Jinping will soon lose the mandate of heaven. I don't know, dude. Yeah, Guardsman, if you don't know, since the early 2000s, China has been continuously building buildings, and they're just building buildings to build buildings. That's what they're doing. They're building buildings to build buildings. And some of these buildings are called tofu dregs, which are falling apart immediately after being built. And then they have ghost cities where they have built like these entire massive cities. And these cities that could hold 300, 400, 500,000 people, and no one lives in them. Not a soul lives in them. The collapse of the Chinese economy would rebound in a lot of Western countries as well. This is true. This is very true, Andrew. This is why we've started to move a lot of production. A lot of production started to be moved away from China. I mean, quite simply put, China's entire economy is on borrowed time, and everyone knows it. Oh, you wanted to... Oh, okay. So get this confused, okay? A Russian team of Spetsnaz, I can't remember what kind of building they were in, but they were going in to try to root out some Ukrainian fighters. They also built Paris, Baron. Paris says they built an English village for some reason. They built recreations of London and Paris, and both of them are ghost towns. Any case. So the Spetsnaz go in there, they jump inside of an elevator, and the Ukrainians cut power to the elevator and strand their ass there. They got stuck in the elevator. For comparison, that would be like a SEAL team getting caught in an elevator. I saw that. I had to get off the computer for the day because I was looking at it like that. You guys have got to be shitting me. Oh. Yep. Zim, you're right. And so everybody talks about how everybody, like every single time, because, I mean, remember when they were talking about, the entire build-up before Russia happened, before Russia actually invaded the Ukraine, everybody was talking about how Russia could invade and pierce all the way in and be at France's doorstep before anyone could react, and the United States had to do all this other kind of stuff, and I was sitting there the entire time going, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. And then they sit there and invade Ukraine and run out of gas 50 fucking miles from the border. And I just looked at the screen like, you gotta be shitting me. How do you... I don't respect you, and you already have proven yourself that you can't do... Oh my god. Anyhow, I'm gonna stop talking about this because... Yeah, the whole war is like the voyage of the damn Cobalt. No kidding. The whole war right now is like the voyage of the damn. Russia, in any universe that made any kind of logical sense, based off industry, GDP, construction values, standard of living, military service personnel, every metric known, they should have conquered the Ukraine 15 times over by now. 15 times over by now. It just blows my mind. Russia hasn't upgraded and updated their equipment and tech in eons. It's just stupid, dude. Special forces special did how much they fuck up. That's true. The Polish army is now begging for blood. Dude, the Polish would just... I'm going to tell you guys, I thought that, like, before all this kicked off, I had been saying that Russia could probably take on a European, one of the Western European countries. Poland, they could probably take on Germany alone. Blah, 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 blah. But the second the rest of NATO responded, they would get their shit ran. I'm pretty much of the opinion right now, based off everything that I've seen, that if Poland declared war tomorrow, Poland could enter space because they would they would slap a Polish flag on the side of the International Space Station. It would be absolutely stupid. Okay, I'm done talking about war because, my God, if China invaded any country, dude, it is so ridiculous. Dictatorships breed incompetence. Putin keeps the Russian military incompetent to prevent a hero from deposing him. Then he Pikachu face when it turns out to be incompetent. Okay, look. Everybody saw this coming. Everybody who was actually paying attention to anything saw this coming. But we always have to have somebody to be afraid of. We always have to have somebody to be afraid of. So, you know, of course, they're going to prop up any time Putin farts into the wind and it knocks out a ground squirrel as being the biggest biological weapon in history. Can you check out the Chinese apartment building collapses on its own just to make the point of how screwed up they are? It's 6 minutes. Dude, anybody can... I will play that in the background while I talk. Hold on a second, Blue. Yeah. Poland can into space. Yes, Baron. That's, Oh, yeah, hold on. This is even better. Hold on. Look at this. This is a ghost town in China. This is a ghost town, okay? This is a ghost town. Look at what they're doing. Because the contractor is so broken out of money. These buildings aren't finished. They've been standing there for 7 years. You see any cars anywhere? Alright, guys. I'm done. I'm done. Anytime, like, Control is one of the best Jedi guys. Like, look at this. It's so damn fun. I'm done. I'm done. There's no cars anywhere because nobody's in the damn city. Warpugs, I'm out of here. I'm out of here, Warpug. Before I get any more irritated about this crap than I already do. Thank you for joining me. I hope you guys had fun. I hope you guys tolerated me ranting like a moron for a little while. I will catch you guys next time, and I hope you have a good night, okay? Oh my God.